Fact 0. The first thing you should know before we even talk about the details of this watch, before we get to our list of 5 things, is that the Rolex GMT-Master 2 is nearly impossible to buy at retail price from an authorized dealer. If you have successfully acquired one of these on the primary market, consider yourself lucky. Everyone else will have to purchase multiple watches from the same AD. You'll have to, quote, build a relationship whether you like them or not. And there's all the other required sucking up that has turned so many people off from the process of spending tens of thousands of dollars of your money on a watch. That's been the common experience for a lot of people, so we're stating it at the top. This has created a situation where it's quicker and easier to buy one online, and if you go for one of the hidden gem models that we'll talk about later, it's less expensive too. I'm Thomas Hendricks, and today we're talking about this bad boy right here, the Rolex GMT Master and GMT Master 2. In this video, you'll learn all the terminology and nicknames you might have heard for this watch. You'll hear about the key technological developments throughout the history of the GMT and which upgrades happened when. You'll see the most expensive, most collectible Rolex GMTs on the market, and you'll see the ones that should be more expensive than they are in case you're looking for a deal. Finally, you'll see how the Rolex GMT matches up against other GMT watches from other luxury brands on the market, including the biggest competition for the GMT Master. All right, let's keep the pacing up into a lightning round of terminology and nicknames that are thrown around for this watch. And you'll learn more about these individual watches throughout the video. First up is the Pepsi. This blue and red bicolor bezel is the most iconic and most recognizable iteration of the GMT. It was the original color scheme for the GMT starting in 1955 and continues to be the most popular in the collective consciousness. If you don't like the Pepsi, then how about a Coke? This, of course, refers to the black and red bezels that ran from 1982 to 2007. The root beer nickname refers to either the two-tone or the full ever rose gold GMTs with 2 colors on the bezel. The two-tone in black and full gold and black GMTs do not seem to have a popular nickname for whatever reason. Another name you'll hear a lot is Gotham's own Batman. This refers to the black and blue bicolor ceramic bezels first appearing in 2013. When the next generation of this watch debuted in 2019 on a Jubilee bracelet, you started to hear people call it the Batgirl to distinguish it from that earlier reference on an Oyster bracelet. Now that the watch is available on your choice of Oyster or Jubilee, people have most commonly referred to any black and blue GMT as a Batman. In recent years, we've seen the green and black left-handed GMT earn the nickname Sprite to continue the soda-themed system. To continue the comic book naming system, the gray and black GMT that launched in 2024 is being called the Bruce Wayne. Digging deeper, you may have seen the name Lunette Noir pop up every now and then. That refers to the all-black ceramic bezel, reference 116710LN, with the green GMT hand running from 2007 to 2019. The LN in that reference number stands for Lunette Noir, which translates to black bezel in English. It's not a common nickname and for whatever reason doesn't seem to apply to the early aluminum bezel 16710s with the red GMT hand. GMTs with blue and fuchsia pink bezels are commonly called fuchsia GMTs, although you may hear them called pink panthers as well. These bezels came out of the factory in a fuchsia color and are not the result of fading. A bezel that does seem to carry a little more mystery is the blueberry bezel. There's some debate as to whether these were test bezels by Rolex, or special orders, or maybe military issued, or just plain aftermarket. Ghost bezels refer to any bezel GMT or otherwise that has significantly faded over time. The fading makes these bezels harder to read, but the look can appeal to some collectors. When we talked about a fat lady, we're not making a middle school insult. We're talking about the reference 16760 that needed a fatter case to accommodate a new, thicker movement. Finally, nipple dials are called nipple dials because these protruding gold hour markers resemble, well, you know. Next up, if you're considering purchasing a GMT now or in the future, you'll want to know about the key improvements Rolex made to the watch and when. We're talking about more durable bezels, more powerful lume, and more efficient movements. This is helpful if you want to get specific about, say, getting one with a newer quickset date, but also an older aluminum bezel that earns more character with age. So let's talk through these slow and steady changes over the years. When the GMT debuted in 1955, it featured a bezel made of bakelite, which is essentially plastic. These are naturally quite fragile, and very few have survived over the years. The ones that have survived are highly collectible because of this rarity. Another downside of these watches was that they were full of radium. Radium allowed the hands, hour markers, and bezel text to shine in the dark for greater visibility, but radium is, as the name implies, radioactive. And in 1961, an American naval officer sued Rolex, claiming that the radium bezel had caused his cancer diagnosis. Rolex had already started swapping the Bakelite and radium bezels for metal bezel inserts a couple of years prior in 1959, and so you'll see some of these original 6542s with replacement bezels from Rolex. Another improvement comes in 1959 with the new reference 1675. This model ran for over 2 decades until 1980, and the easiest way to tell the difference between a 6542 and the later 1675 is by the crown guards. This is good information for those who like vintage sport watches, but who want them to have a little extra protection when possible. One of the biggest, most practical improvements came in 1980 with a reference 16750 and its quick set date function. Before, you had to turn and turn and turn the hands to correct the date, and now you could set the date independently of the time thanks to the new caliber 3075. The 50 meters of water resistance was doubled to 100, and the frequency of the movement jumped from 19,600 vibrations per hour to what today is a standard 28.8. If you were waiting for an independent hour hand, here it is. Starting in 1982, we get the first GMT-Master 2, which is also the first red and black coat GMT in the form of the reference 16760. Now, wearers are finally able to move the hour hand separately from the GMT hand, making it quicker to set the local time on the watch as you moved forwards or backwards through different time zones. This reference is also known as the Fat Lady because the new caliber 3085 was a bit thicker and needed a thicker case to accommodate it. If you don't like the name Fat Lady, you could also call it the Sophia Loren. Talk about body positivity. The second GMT-Master 2, the reference 16710, gets a slimmer movement starting in 1989 thanks to the new 3185 movement. This reference had a long run from 1989 to 2007, and over that time, you'll see the lume change from tritium in the early years to luminova in roughly 1998, 1999, and then superluminova starting in the year 2000. 2000 is also the year when Rolex introduces solid end lengths to the GMT, and in 2003, the lug holes are phased out for a cleaner look. More major changes come in 2007 with the 116710LN, a watch we'll talk about more later in the hidden gems section of this video. With this reference, you get the first Serichrome bezel of any Rolex steel sport watch. You get the Parachrom hairspring and the new caliber 318 sets for greater resistance to shots and temperature changes. And for better or for worse, you get a thicker case as well. And a little further into the production run of the 116710LN, you get the bluish chroma light lume replacing the previous superluminova. Finally, we'll end with the 6-digit reference 126710, which is the current generation Rolex GMT-Master 2. You've got the decades of changes we've already mentioned, and it's available on either a Jubilee or an Oyster bracelet with the Oyster lock clasp with some built-in 5mm adjustment on the fly. And it's got that new caliber 3285. The new movement bumps the power reserve from 50 to 70 hours, and it features the more efficient chronometry escapement, and it's more resistant to shots and temperature changes than before. We'll touch quickly on the most collectible Rolex GMTs on the market. Now, for a more in-depth look at this topic, check out our recent video on the most collectible Rolex watches of the last 100 years, including all the major models like the Datejust, the Submariner, the Daytona, and of course, the GMT. The first reference of any watch are always going to be collectible, and the original GMT, reference 6542, is no exception. You'll need some luck finding them in good conditions, and bonus points if you can find one with that original Bakelite bezel.
Wow, I had no idea.
The reference 1675 is the most widely collected vintage Rolex GMT because it had a long production run from 1959 to 1980, and because it has this romantic mid-century aura around it thanks to its connection with the golden age of air travel. With such a long production run, there are also many variations to keep collectors busy. We're talking things like gilt dials, fuchsia bezels, blueberry bezels, pointed crown guards, exclamation marks, small triangles, long E's, and on and on. It may seem strange for those getting into vintage collecting, but those tiny differences do make a difference in the uniqueness of each watch. Albino GMTs are extremely valuable if you happen to get extremely lucky in finding one. The first Coke reference, aka the Fat Lady or the Sophia Loren, certainly has its fans as well. And if you're a fan of Tom Selleck's Magnum PI, then check out the 16750. When we enter into the neo-vintage era of the 90s and early 2000s, you'll find some mismatched details from these transitional years. A key example of this are what's known as error or stick dials. They include details that shouldn't really be there, and these mistakes make the watches more interesting and more valuable. In the modern era, collectability is mostly determined by the materials used, and the higher price tags for things like precious metal cases, gem set models, and meteorite dials are fairly self-explanatory. So, in short, if you want to get a truly collectible GMT, go vintage, go for something a bit weird, and go for one in the best condition you can find. Following that last section and given the current market premiums for this watch, you may be surprised to learn that you can find Rolex GMTs around or even under $10,000. Here's the big key. You can get a good deal on a watch just by liking something different than most people. I happen to love vintage two-tone GMTs, and I think they look even better on a strap than on a bracelet. They also happen to be some of the most approachably priced options on the market. If you prefer the black and red Coke over the blue and red Pepsi, then you're in luck because you'll get a watch that you love and that not a lot of people have, and you'll save money in the process. One of the best pieces for buying watches, and this came up over and over in our collector interview with Mitch Katz, is to ignore what other people think you should buy and focus on what actually appeals to your personal taste. Here's another example. The Lunette Noir Reference 116710LN was not just the first steel GMT to sport the ceramic bezel, but the first steel sport Rolex, period. That's before the Submariner and before the Daytona. It's sleek, it's low-key, and that green GMT hand and green text on the dial are handsome touches. And yet, nobody talks about it. If you're someone who likes black watches, it could be one to consider. Also, if you want a GMT-Master that isn't immediately recognizable as a GMT-Master, it could be one to consider. Prices for these currently hover around 11 or 12K. Same but different, you could opt for the full black 16710 with the red GMT hand. These are aluminum bezels that will fade a bit with time, like a pair of well-worn black jeans. I think there's a beauty to that, and you can get a good deal on one if you feel the same. A general tip for finding a deal on a GMT, or really any Rolex, is to look for ones with 5-digit reference numbers. These are great watches because they are often overlooked, because they're neither the latest and greatest, nor the earliest vintage examples. People will still say, oh wow, cool GMT, and you can spend those extra thousands of dollars that you saved on anything else, like a vacation with your new GMT. Let's talk about competition for this watch, because if you're considering getting a GMT and you have the budget available for a luxury watch, then chances are this isn't the only one you're considering. There are more options than people think, and I'll mention the biggest competitor to the GMT-Master towards the end. First up, if we're talking Rolex, then we're also talking Tudor. Sure, this might not necessarily eliminate your desire for a Rolex GMT, but it could delay it. Tudor has been consistently expanding their line of GMT watches in recent years with releases like the Polar Pepsi, the Black Bay Pro, the Diet Root Beer, and the Pelagos FXD GMT. You get a lot of that ruggedness and solidity and classic design with Tudor at a much more approachable price. It's obviously a close sibling to Rolex and is therefore a requisite inclusion. Everybody's always talking about Rolex versus Omega, Omega versus Rolex, and that's what we're talking about next. Omega doesn't really have one standout GMT the way that Rolex does, and maybe that lack of focus has hurt them competitively. On the other hand, you do have a lot to choose from, and the build quality is superb, and there are plenty of people who genuinely prefer brands like Omega over Rolex. For a short list, I'd say the strongest options from Omega are the various Planet Ocean GMTs, the Black Dial Seamaster Aquaterra with the red GMT hand, and my favorite, the Aquaterra World Timer with his beautiful blue dial featuring 24 locations across 24 time zones and that delightfully detailed globe in the center. In terms of craft, in terms of quality, we should also mention Grand Seiko here. These can get very sporty very quickly when they combine a GMT with a chronograph, for example, but you can also choose from a wide variety of thoughtful and measured GMTs. Some with snowflake dials, some with engraved dials, some with colors ranging from classic and subtle to more rich and vibrant. And if you like the look and feel of vintage watches but want something more reliable, the SBG M221 is a decidedly handsome option. So whereas Rolex offers a rather limited range to choose from and Omega offers perhaps too much to choose from, Grand Seiko strikes this kind of just right balance between focus and variety. For whatever reason, I feel like there's some audience overlap between the Rolex lovers and the Panaristi, and watches like the Luminor 8 Days GMT offer this bold, substantial, time-tested design that doesn't feel too over the top. GMTs are, of course, rooted in aviation history, and there are plenty of people out there who want to lean into this with a Breitling GMT or perhaps even a Bremont. These also offer plenty of options to incorporate a chronograph or rotating bezel for even more functionality. Now, if none of these watches are doing it for you, chances are you're set on getting a Rolex. It could be because of the legacy of it, or because of the build quality, or you like the look of it, or what it communicates to others around you, or any combination of these factors. With that in mind, the biggest competition for the Rolex GMT is another Rolex. Of course, there are many out there deciding between a GMT and a Submariner. These are two of Rolex's most important and iconic designs, and they fall within roughly the same price point. I do, however, want to point out that an even closer competitor is the Explorer 2. This watch was originally designed for cave explorers who needed to know when day turned to night while underground, but I'd wager you're more likely to be hopping on a plane than crawling into a cave. The look of the Explorer 2 is more subtle and more discreet. It's not as immediately recognizable as a Rolex, and that can be a plus. It's also more approachably priced, although we are seeing premium examples of the creamy polar dial Explorer 2 of the 5-digit era increasing in price, rarity, and desirability. We'd also be remiss not to mention the reference 1655, which has a cult following all its own, and whose market rates are what we'd call in the collectible territory. I do hope this guide was helpful to you, and I'm thankful for the level of knowledge in this audience. So if there's a detail I missed or a competitor I overlooked, please include it in a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.